Before we dive into today's episode, I have something truly special to share. Next September, I'll be leading an intimate women's retreat through the south of France and northern Italy, and you're invited. Picture this: mornings exploring the colorful markets of the French Riviera, afternoons sipping wine, and a hotel view with golden Mediterranean sunsets. Whether you love photography, food, or just want to reconnect with your playful creative self, this trip is designed for you. Spots are limited, so if all this sounds like your kind of adventure, please visit tourwithabsolutely.com and look for the tour France and Italy with Crystal. You can also send me a message or check out the show notes. Hey guys, my name's Crystal Kenny, and I'm in love with creating. All things artistic and imagination involved. I'm an American girl who chased her creative dreams all the way to Paris, France, making a living using photography. This podcast takes you inside the stories of all the artsy folks I've met along the way and gives you that extra push to discover your creative gifts. The desire to create is deeply inside each and every one of us, and I give you the tools and inspiration to find a new way of living a more creative life. This is La Vie Creative, the podcast. Hey guys, my name's Crystal Kenny, and I'm in love with creating. All things artistic and imagination involved. I'm an American girl who chased her creative dreams all the way to Paris, France, making a living using photography. This podcast takes you inside the stories of all the artsy folks I've met along the way and gives you that extra push to discover your creative gifts. The desire to create is deeply inside each and every one of us, and I give you the tools and inspiration to find a new way of living a more creative life. This is La Vie Creative, the podcast. So welcome to the show, David.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I've been enjoying reading about you, learning about your life, and you moved to Paris in the 1980s. What was that like?
Oh, it was fantastic. I grew up essentially in San Francisco and Berkeley, and I loved the Bay Area. I felt that I needed to get out into the real world. The real world for me was the East Coast, New York, and Italy, Rome. My mother was from Rome, and I had lived in Rome in the mid-1960s, and I loved Europe. I had also traveled around a lot, and I lived in Paris very briefly in the mid-1970s. And so when I finally was able to get to Paris in 1985, I rented an apartment, and then I moved in 1986, and I felt incredibly liberated and elated. And I just said I rented an apartment, but it was a maid's room, actually a box room on the 7th floor, and it didn't have a window, it just had a skylight. But I could climb up a ladder and look through the skylight and see the Arc de Triomphe and the Eiffel Tower. So I was pretty thrilled.
Definitely. I think we've all lived in one of those at some point, the chambre de bonne. You're up in the attic climbing all those stairs, and they're always a little more affordable.
Yeah, at that time, it was dirt cheap. In fact, that was one of the most liberating things about the experience. I was in my late 20s. I was almost 30, and I had done various jobs, and I actually probably earned a better living back then as a very young man than I ever did later. And I rented this chambre de bonne, and the rent was so cheap, I paid an entire year's rent up front, just out of my pocket. And so for the first time as an adult, I was able to think about doing all the things that I had fantasized about doing since I was a teenager. I wanted to be a writer way back when I was very young, but I didn't know how to go about it. And I also just didn't have the means. I always had to work to make a living, to pay rent somewhere. And so suddenly I found myself in Paris, age 29, with a little maid's room, crow's nest, that was paid up for an entire year. And that was, as I say, extremely liberating.
And is that when you really started to focus on your writing?
I had tried to write from a very early age. I wrote my first novella when I was probably 17 or 18. I can't even remember. Luckily, nothing that I wrote back then was published. In hindsight, I realized that I absolutely had no clue how to go about the job, the profession of being a writer. It took me a very long time to figure out how to do that. But I will say that in my 30s, I started making a living as a professional travel and food writer. And then I eventually wrote books and started writing fiction and so forth. And I've always made a living, and I'm proud of that. I taught myself. I got a BA, 2 BAs in political science and Italian literature, and I got a master's in Italian literature. I was going to finish my PhD, but I was eager to get into the world, so I bailed out. And I didn't want to be involved with academia. I found it extremely stifling, stultifying. I didn't want to take creative writing courses. I didn't want to belong to a school or a clan or a group of creative people. I just wanted to do it on my own. And I did that. And now I am an antique, but I can say with some satisfaction that even though I'm not an international celebrity or anything, I did live the creative life that I set out to when I was really a teenager.
Yeah, exactly. And it's no small feat to make money at something you love. It's pretty amazing when you're able to be a full-time writer.
Yeah, I don't think I could do it again now. To be honest, everything has changed. Back then, you could contribute articles to newspapers and magazines and be paid fairly well for it. I got up to the top of the scale when I was writing for glossy magazines, and I made a decent living. Back then, there were thousands of us doing that, probably tens of thousands. And right now, I don't know how many people can make a living writing professionally for newspapers and magazines. Substack is one outlet that seems to work for certain people. I'm on Substack, and I think it's really great. That's absolutely the best platform, if you ask me, for creative expression at this point, for writers at least. It has its limits for photographers and video makers, but for writers and also podcasters, it's really very good. And if you have enough paid subscribers, I suppose you could make a decent living. I know some people do. They're usually already famous when they join Substack. Heather Cox Richardson is the perfect example. She's a professor of history. So, she didn't need to make money off of Substack, but she has hundreds of thousands of subscribers. I'm not sure how many of them are paying, but certainly tens of thousands. So I think she does very well. There are others who do very well. That is one way to make a living. I'm not sure how many others there are right now.
Yeah, definitely. It's not great thing to the work. It's totally changed, as you said. There's new avenues to get our workouts. Talk a little bit about what inspired your writing. You've written 6 novels, over a dozen nonfiction books. Talk about where you find inspiration to keep going.
Oh, yeah, that's a mystery to me, honestly. Every time I sit down, I pull the cork out of the bottle and the genie comes out. And if it doesn't come out, then I don't write. I'm mystified about where the creativity comes from. I remember decades ago, I interviewed the great short story writer Mavis Gallant. I profiled her for a couple of magazines, and I asked her a similar question, and she looked at me like I had just hit her with an electric prod, and she said, I have no idea. I don't know. I just do it. And at the time, I was taken aback, but I do understand her now. I'm really not sure where it comes from. It just does.
Yeah, and I think I asked this about a lot of my partners on the show or self-it's experience. Sometimes it's the divine spirit, like we don't know. It's just something speaking through us. So it definitely sounds like a combination of both. And listening to my speakers, and talk a little bit about what it was like dividing your time between Paris and Rome. You were also living in Rome.
Yeah, it wasn't so much Rome. I did live in Rome at different times, but Italy, in northern Italy, near Genoa mostly. But I also lived in Milan for a number of years and in Padua, where I studied at the university there and at the university in Venice. So essentially my entire adult life, really since the late 1970s, I've been going back and forth between Italy and France. And at this point in my life, I find it kind of a challenge and somewhat disruptive simply because of the necessities of picking up and moving from one place to the next. In the past, again, I found it liberating, and I always loved comparing the Italians and the French. Cocteau said that the French are Italians in a bad mood, and that resonated with me because I grew up in a crazy household with an Italian mother who was very voluble and animated, and most of the Italian situations that I found myself in, either living there or working or studying, the people were very garrulous and often lighthearted and joyful. And I used to laugh a lot in Italy. And in France, I found that considerably less. France, compared to the United States, is often joyful and lighthearted and so forth. But Italy is really another planet. It's another place. It's Mediterranean, and it's much sunnier in many ways. And I think that is reflected in my books about the two countries. And in my personality, I have both. I've been in France for so many years. I've become a lot like the French, though that's one of those dangerous things to say, because who are the French? Every French man and woman is different. But there is a kind of rationality here and rigorousness, especially in intellectual circles, that you don't find in Italy. Italians are much more Baroque. I think the Baroque spirit definitely lives on. And I think that's true of my personality. I also think the language is a big influence. It really affects the personality and the creativity, if you will. I'm much more outgoing and jokey and lighthearted when I'm speaking Italian and thinking in Italian, or I've actually written, and I wrote one book in Italian. And I find that largely evaporates in France. Again, it's a kind of intellectual rigor and seriousness in France that takes over.
Definitely. The French are a little more serious. And talk a little bit about your new memoir, Shadows of Rome. It's a personal book. And what were some of the challenges in writing it?
I think the biggest challenge was to force myself to write it, because I spent decades researching, trying to find things out about my Italian grandfather and my mother's life in Rome. And I talked to people who were alive. I consulted books and archives, and I just kept piling up information, cutting articles, because I still read newspapers, or my wife does, and then we cut out articles. And so I had vast quantities of information. And then how do I put this thing together? I'd never written a memoir, and the story, if you will, the many stories cover a period of over 100 years. So how do I put it together? How do I weave it together? Where do I start? And how do I turn these anecdotes, these episodes, into a coherent story that I can tell in a more or less chronological order? So that was a huge challenge.
Definitely. There's so much to cover with family too. So talk a little bit about how memoir can blur the lines between memory and storytelling. How did you navigate the balance while staying true to your experiences?
As I say in the book a couple of times, I did my best to research as thoroughly as I could, and then I just told the story. And sometimes I realized that I was winging it and that I was imagining what had been said and what had happened, because there was just no material I could refer to. What I was mostly drawing on were my mother's stories and a handwritten memoir that she gave me, which was very revealing about herself and her family. But the book is about more than my mother or my grandfather or my father in World War II. It's really about the whole family and about me. So I weave my own life in and my childhood memories. And there, again, I thought I had perfect recall of a variety of events. And then I discovered from one of my sisters, who's 10 years older than I am, that I had forgotten to mention this, or that I had misremembered, or at least that's what she says. I did what I could, but I didn't want to keep myself from writing something because I wasn't absolutely sure. I just let it go.
Yeah, you just went with the creativity flow. And what advice do you have for other writers?
Find another profession. I'll tell you something. My father was a newspaperman all his life. And when I told him when I was a teenager that I wanted to write, he blanched and he said, "Oh, God, please don't do that. Do something else and just write on the side." And so I took his advice and I tried to get into academia and do that. I thought I'd be a professor and then write on the side, but I couldn't. And I didn't want to. I just wanted to write. So I think that people who are driven to write can't be stopped. It's like musicians who have to play music and athletes who have to do whatever sport they do. So I think in my case, it was urgency. And I think that my one bit of advice would be that if you don't feel that urgency, then don't do it. Do something else. Because being a writer is a very difficult job. It's very hard to accept rejection over and over, year in and year out. Because even if you have some successes and you find publishers and you get your books out there, you still have no idea what the reception will be. You don't know if they'll sell, and you don't know what's going to happen. And when you go on a book tour and you are faced by an audience and so forth, it's very difficult. And then all the practicalities of trying to make it as a writer are practically insurmountable. That's like telling a salmon not to swim upstream to spawn. If you're going to be a writer, you're going to do it and no one's going to stop you. So there's not much I can say other than best of luck. And I hope you're a very strong swimmer and can get up those fish ladders.
I think that's great advice. You have to do it and show up. And many of my have to be able to move into France or Italy. What advice do you have for them?
I certainly understand the desire to live in France or Italy beyond merely the desire to escape the reality of what's going on in America right now, which is terrifying. But I think the important thing is wherever you go to draw on your inner strengths and on your inner vision. It's easy to get distracted as a writer by your surroundings. Paris is a very seductive place, for example. You can just go out and planer, wander around all day, looking at things and sitting in cafes and going into museums and so forth. Will you get any work done? I don't know. The same applies to Rome. Rome is like a vast open air living room or salon where you can sit down and munch on an ice cream cone and watch the world go by. And I think that if you are serious about being a creative person of whatever kind, writing or painting or dancing or playing an instrument, whatever it is, you really have to learn to draw on your own resources wherever you are. Now, I will grant you that when you're young, it's a great idea to meet as many people as you can and have as many experiences as you can and listen to people. I used to sit in cafes and just eavesdrop, and that's a great way to learn to write dialogue, by the way, because you hear things in your head, but then when you actually sit there and you listen to people and how they communicate, you realize that there's so much in the nonverbal communication and the gestures and so forth. And you have to figure out how to integrate that into your dialogues without writing things that are clunky. He said, she said, blah, blah, blah. So go out and get experience. Absolutely. Read constantly, read books, watch movies, go to art shows, read history, lots of history. Even if you're just going to write contemporary fiction about, I don't know, your cat or your dog or your grandma or something, it doesn't matter. The more history you read, the better off you'll be because you'll have a better understanding of the world you live in. I think that's probably the best advice I can give. Oh, and maybe stay away from creative writing programs taught by cynical people who just want your money and can't teach you the creative part of writing. You can teach someone shortcuts in writing, and you can give them a copy of Strunk and White and other style manuals and so forth. And so journalism school can be very useful and writing schools can be useful, but I absolutely do not believe that you can teach creative writing. The creativity has to be something that you manufacture, that is your own, that you draw out of yourself.
I think that's great advice, especially about staying away from the people who just want your money. They want to help you the way they really can. And after writing across so many genres like fiction, travel, memoir, what still excites you about sitting down to write?
What's the what? Sorry, I didn't hear that last bit.
Yeah, what still excites you about sitting down to write?
Oh, yeah. What really excites me is pulling that cork out of the bottle and letting the genie out and seeing what happens, because I never know what's going to happen. And I like surprising myself. When I'm writing fiction, for example, sometimes I have something plotted out in my head, and I may have written down some notes and sketched out a scene or a chapter. And then in the middle of it, my characters do something else, and they take over and they run away and they do something completely unexpected. And then I've got to change the book. And so instead of feeling betrayed or angry or frustrated, I think that's actually really a fantastic thing. And again, I'm not sure where it comes from. So it's the excitement of sitting down and never quite knowing what is going to come out.
Definitely. It's still there. And you can find creativity in your own words.
Oh, I wouldn't. I couldn't. Again, I think it's part of the great mystery. I'm an atheist, a skeptic. I'm so skeptical. I'm skeptical of skepticism. But I do look at the night sky and wonder where all this comes from. And I think creativity is like that. That's the wonderful thing about it. And that's why each one of us is unique. Now, I cringe when people say really unique or very unique. Unique is unequaled. It's one. It's just one thing. And that one thing is you and it's me. And that, to me, is a kind of miracle. So where it comes from, I don't know. I don't know where the stars come from. You read about Big Bangs and so forth, but what happened before the Big Bang? I really don't know.
I think that's a great answer. Beautiful note to end on. And where can people connect with you and read your writing?
The best place is Substack, David Downie, author. I'm also on Facebook, but I hardly use it because I object to Zuckerberg and hate what is happening with surveillance capitalism. And so far, Substack seems to be the place to be. And there you can listen to podcasts and read excerpts from books, and you can click on links and buy my books, which would be nice.
Perfect. Well, we'll share all the links in the show notes. And thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to La Vie Creative. You can find more information on MissParisPhoto.com. And if you enjoyed this show, please feel free to share and spread the word for all my creative guests. We have the power to help them to keep doing what they love. See you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in to La Vie Creative. You can find more information on MissParisPhoto.com. And if you enjoyed this show, please feel free to share and spread the word for all my creative guests. We have the power to help them to keep doing what they love. See you next time.